Danielle Coleman, dressed in a crisp black suit, boarded Flight 708 expecting silence, not war. But when she arrived at her seat, 1A, she found a white executive already planted there, legs crossed, eyes dismissive. "You must be lost, ma'am. This is first class," he smirked. The cabin froze. She didn't argue. She simply reached for her phone and whispered, "Activate Protocol Cobalt." What happened next? The plane never took off. The company behind that smirk unraveled. And the woman they underestimated? She rewrote the rules midair. The last thing I expected that morning was turbulence on the ground. I had arrived early, breezing through TSA with a carry-on and a calm mind. My assistant, Marcia, had checked me in hours ago. Everything about Flight 379 from LAX to Washington, D.C. was supposed to be seamless, like the hundreds I'd taken before. Except this one, it seems, had other plans. As I stepped into the cool air of the jet bridge, a flight attendant greeted me with a rehearsed smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome aboard." I nodded with the faintest acknowledgement. The truth is, I didn't need the pleasantries. What I needed was peace. I had a Senate briefing in less than 18 hours. Nova Mind's Global Education Initiative was days from launch. And while the world knew me as the no-nonsense tech CEO who once debated a billionaire live on national television, all I really wanted was 4 hours of silence in 1A. But when I turned into the first-class cabin, I stopped. Someone was already there. A man, white, mid to late 50s, square jaw, tan suit too bright for the occasion, had his elbow resting on the armrest of my seat. He glanced up at me briefly, then looked back at his phone like I was a minor inconvenience in his day. I double-checked my boarding pass. Seat 1A. No mistake. I cleared my throat politely. "Excuse me, sir. I believe you're in my seat." He didn't even look up. "No, ma'am. I don't think so." I held out the pass. "Seat 1A. Confirmed." Now he looked at me, fully, squarely. And there it was, that look. The one that's not quite disbelief, not quite amusement. The one black women in power know all too well. He leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, and gave a small laugh, dry and dismissive. "Ma'am," he said with exaggerated patience, "this seat isn't for charity promotions." The sentence landed like a slap. Loud enough for the woman in 1B to shift uncomfortably. Loud enough for the murmurs to begin behind me in the boarding line. I caught the eye of the male flight attendant at the galley. His expression twisted somewhere between confusion and embarrassment. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I held the pass out again. "My name is Danielle Coleman. This is my seat. I booked it 2 weeks ago, confirmed again yesterday, and scanned through biometric verification 10 minutes ago. Kindly move." He chuckled. "You must be mistaken. I always fly 1A on this route. Platinum status." The attendant stepped closer, professional to a fault. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Richard handed it over casually, as if this were just some formality we'd all laugh about later. His eyes dared me to challenge him. The attendant read it, frowned slightly, and looked at me. "Ms. Coleman, you are indeed 1A. Mr. Hale, Richard Hale," he added sharply, smiling now. "Yes, Mr. Hale, your boarding pass says 4C, business class." Richard leaned forward, elbows on knees. "There must be a system error. I'll sit here today. It's not that deep." "It is to me," I said quietly. More passengers were boarding now. Some looked our way. A teenager near the front had already pulled out a phone. In 2025, everything ends up online, especially injustice. The attendant tried again. "Mr. Hale, I'm afraid we need to resolve this now. Could I ask you to please move to your assigned seat so we may begin takeoff procedures?" "No," he said simply. "This is ridiculous." His voice had risen just enough for a woman near row 2 to raise her brow. The man beside her began muttering under his breath. I still hadn't sat. I wasn't going to sit anywhere except where I belonged. The attendant tried calling the purser. Then, suddenly, a chime echoed overhead. The captain's voice broke through, clipped and official. Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a delay during boarding. Due to a potential security concern, we are holding all operations until further notice. Please remain seated. The cabin stilled. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air vents. A security concern? The word spread like wildfire. I saw passengers exchanging glances. A mother clutching her baby held her breath. Someone dropped their earbuds. Richard shifted in his seat and muttered, "Now look what you've done." I said nothing. I just stood there, my boarding pass still in hand, eyes forward. Let them think what they wanted. Let them whisper, assume, doubt. Because the moment I sat down without my seat, the moment I let entitlement steal my dignity, I wouldn't just lose a chair. I'd lose something far more permanent. A man in uniform appeared at the cabin entrance. TSA. Airport security? No badge visible, just a crisp suit and a hard face. He spoke to the flight attendant in hushed tones, then turned toward me. "Ms. Coleman," he said firmly, but not unkindly. "Could I ask you to step into the jet bridge for a moment?" I nodded. The murmurs behind me exploded as I stepped back through the cabin. I could feel Richard's smug grin radiating like radiation. The seat was his, for now. But as I crossed the threshold of the aircraft and stepped into the quiet of the jet bridge, I didn't feel defeated. I felt the storm coming. The jet bridge was cold and silent, an odd contrast to the bubbling tension I'd just stepped out of. I stood tall, arms relaxed by my side, even as the uniformed man beside me pulled out a tablet and scrolled quickly. He wasn't TSA, I realized now. Not airport security either. He wore a discreet comm device in his ear and had the poise of someone who answered only to very high places. "Just a moment, Ms. Coleman," he said, voice clipped. I nodded once, not bothering to correct him. He already knew my name. The question was, did everyone else? Back in the cabin, the air was different. Passengers murmured louder now. The discomfort wasn't just about the delay. It was about the spectacle. A black woman removed from first class, a white man left seated without consequence. Near row 2, a younger flight attendant leaned toward her colleague. "That's Danielle Coleman, isn't it?" she whispered. The other glanced over his shoulder and froze. "No, it can't be." "I think it is," she insisted. "My sister's in tech. She showed me a podcast with her on it last week. She runs that AI education company, right? Nova something." "Nova Mind," he said under his breath. Both of them fell silent. Meanwhile, Richard Hale was still reclined in seat 1A, tapping on his phone with a smug tilt to his mouth. He wasn't gloating exactly, but he wasn't afraid either. Entitled men like him rarely are, especially when they believe they control the outcome. He hit dial. "Yeah, it's me. We have a minor situation. Someone's raising a fuss over seat 1A. She's claiming it's hers." He paused. "Danielle Coleman." A beat. "Yes, that one." His tone shifted ever so slightly, less arrogant, more alert. "She's on this flight. Front cabin. I need you to handle this." Another pause. "No, I don't care if she's on some ethics panel. If she gets to DC before we finalize the contract, it'll be a mess." He hung up and tucked his phone away. That was Richard's play. Stall, deny, and let the machine take care of the rest. He didn't need to win outright. He just needed her delayed long enough to disrupt Novamind's next major deal, one that would undercut EtherCorp's stranglehold on 3 education tech contracts with the Department of Defense. He adjusted his tie, ordered a sparkling water, and leaned back with satisfaction. He wasn't worried. He should have been. 3 rows back, by the window seat in 4F, a young woman had watched everything. She was quiet, deliberate, barely 24. Long braids fell down her back, AirPods in her ears. Her name was Imani Thomas, a junior analyst for a rising fintech firm and a part-time vlogger on tech equity and systemic bias. She'd recognized Danielle the second she boarded. She also recognized injustice when she saw it. Without a word, Imani angled her phone, tapped her livestream app, and began filming. No commentary, no theatrics, Just raw footage of a black woman being removed from her rightful seat, while a white executive played ignorant in public view. Within 90 seconds, her stream had 75 viewers. Within 3 minutes, it broke 5,000, and then it exploded. Comments poured in. Is that Danielle Coleman? WTF is going on? First-class discrimination, live. Stream this to @BlackTechMatters. By the time the flight crew realized what was happening, Imani's feed had hit the trending page of 2 social media platforms. Journalists were already screen-grabbing. A well-known tech watchdog account retweeted it with the caption, "When a black woman pays for seat 1A and still gets sent to the jet bridge, while a white exec sits smug. Welcome to American Aviation 2025. Inside the jet bridge, the uniformed man's tablet pinged. He glanced down, eyes narrowing. Danielle sat silently in a gray waiting chair just outside the door, her posture calm. She knew better than to appear rattled. Silence, at times, was the loudest weapon. The man turned slightly. Ms. Coleman, are you aware that this incident is currently broadcasting live to over 500,000 viewers? Danielle looked at him. I expected no less. He blinked. Back inside, the captain had been notified. His brow furrowed as he scanned the brief message on his cockpit terminal. Passenger involved is confirmed VIP under Federal Tech Advisory clearance. Proceed with extreme discretion. He stood abruptly and made his way into the cabin. At the same time, Richard's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Stop talking. You're being streamed. The internet's on fire. Get off the flight now. His jaw tightened. Then he looked up, straight into the camera lens of Imani's phone. For the first time since takeoff was delayed, Richard Hale looked unsettled. He stood and turned toward the galley. Excuse me, he said to the lead flight attendant. There may have been a misunderstanding earlier. I'd like to speak to the captain. Too late. Danielle re-entered the cabin at that exact moment, silent, measured, impeccably composed. All eyes turned. The uniformed man trailed behind her, this time 2 paces back, a position of protection, not command. She walked down the aisle, the weight of 1,000 assumptions lifting with each step. Passengers sat straighter. Imani turned the camera slightly, focusing on Danielle's face. No anger, no smugness, just certainty. She reached seat 1A, paused, and looked at Richard. No words passed between them, but everyone felt the shift. He stood, slowly. No apology, no eye contact. He took his bag from the overhead and moved past her, eyes locked on the floor. Danielle sat. A beat of silence followed. Then the captain's voice returned over the speaker, this time sharper. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now clear to resume boarding. Thank you for your patience. The cabin breathed again. Outside the window, the jet bridge withdrew, and online, Danielle Coleman trended worldwide, not because she was rich or powerful or famous, but because she refused to move. The hum of the aircraft engine returned, but it wasn't the comforting signal of departure. It was something more tense, anticipatory, like the low growl before a storm. The boarding resumed, but slowly, cautiously. Every passenger sensed something had shifted, even if they couldn't name it. Danielle sat quietly in 1A, her spine straight, legs crossed at the ankle, hands resting lightly on her lap. Her phone buzzed once, then twice. She turned it over to glance at the notification. It was from Marcia, her chief of operations and silent guardian angel. Boardroom leak confirmed. Hale was tipped off 3 hours ago. Someone at Capitol. Danielle's jaw flexed ever so slightly. Then, without so much as a blink, she tapped her phone screen, opened a secure app that looked like a calendar widget but wasn't, and typed, Initiate Cobalt Protocol. The message vanished the moment she hit send. 2 rows back, a man in an unassuming polo shirt stood up and made his way to the galley. He wasn't on staff. He wasn't on record. But his briefcase contained a red folder marked Code Indigo and a portable comm scrambler. 10 seconds after Danielle's encrypted message was transmitted, 3 silent changes occurred on the plane. The lead flight attendant received a vibration on her wristband. Not from the airline system, but from a secondary, secure channel. The cabin lighting subtly shifted from warm yellow to neutral white, an automated cue for Cobalt clearance confirmation. The cockpit received an override directive from an external source. Passenger 1A, confirmed Federal Asset Level 3. Initiate verification protocol. Do not engage directly. Captain Reynolds blinked at the message. He'd flown for 27 years, handled hurricanes, bomb threats, and even once escorted a senator out of Kabul. But this was something else. He turned to his co-pilot. Secure the door. I'm stepping out. Back in the cabin, Richard Hale hadn't moved far. After surrendering 1A in reluctant silence, he had slouched into 4C, the first row of business class. He was scrolling through his phone, watching his face pop up on every platform imaginable. News outlets, TikToks, memes. One even dubbed him First Class Freddy. "This is a joke," he muttered. Beside him, a woman in a navy blazer shifted uncomfortably and tucked her handbag tighter beneath her seat. He looked up and waved over a flight attendant. "Look, this is spiraling. I just need to speak to someone with actual authority." As if summoned by his own arrogance, the captain appeared at the front of the cabin. But instead of addressing the passengers or the crew, he approached Danielle directly. She looked up, offering a faint smile of recognition. "Ms. Coleman," the captain said quietly, "we've received instructions to verify certain travel parameters. I understand this may be inconvenient." Danielle didn't blink. "You're only following protocol. Do what you must." The captain nodded once. Then, turning to the intercom, he pressed the button. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an elevated verification protocol issued externally, we must briefly remove one passenger for immediate clearance confirmation. Please remain seated." Gasps rippled. All eyes turned to Danielle. Even Imani, still recording though more discreetly now, lowered her camera. "Wait, what?" Richard perked up, confusion replacing his self-pity. "Wait, they're pulling her off now?" Danielle rose calmly, adjusted her blazer, and picked up her bag. She walked toward the front of the aircraft like a woman stepping onto a stage she built herself. No shame, no urgency, just controlled power. The uniformed agent who had previously escorted her was waiting just outside the aircraft door. No handcuffs, no force, just quiet understanding. Back inside, the murmurs returned with force. "Isn't she the CEO? Why would they take her off again? Maybe it was her fault. Or maybe they're protecting her." The narrative fractured instantly. Truth struggled against perception in real time. No one knew the whole story, but everyone had a version. Richard watched her go, smirking. "Karma," he whispered. 3 minutes later, the plane door sealed again. The crew resumed final checks. The seatbelt signs lit up. Cabin doors secured. All that remained was the pushback, but the tension remained like static, thick and invisible. Outside the aircraft, Danielle stood inside a sleek, glass-walled corridor with the agent beside her. "You'll be escorted to a secured suite in the terminal," he said. "Private access, encrypted line. The agency will brief you there." "I'll only need 10 minutes, Danielle replied. The agent nodded. She paused, then added, "Also, give the captain a message." He raised an eyebrow. "Yes, ma'am?" "Tell him, if Richard Hale attempts any form of communication, file, or transmission from that aircraft before wheels up, I'll have him flagged under Section 7 of the Interference Act." The agent didn't ask questions. He just turned and walked back to the plane. Meanwhile, in seat 4C, Richard opened a secure messaging app, intending to send one last instruction to EtherCorp's legal team. The screen froze. A warning flashed. "Outbound transmissions disabled by federal authority." He stared at it. Then he looked up, eyes scanning the cabin. The captain wasn't back yet. Danielle was gone. The crew moved with precision but distant eyes. He leaned back in his chair. Something was off. Something beyond social media backlash or a PR blunder. He wasn't sure what game he'd stepped into, but suddenly he wasn't so sure it was his board anymore. Row 3A was quiet, tucked just behind the chaos of first class, but far enough from business banter to remain mostly invisible. That's exactly how Evelyn Moore preferred it. She sipped her chamomile tea slowly, eyes tracking every movement since Danielle boarded. Not just the confrontation, not just the removal. Every glance, every reaction, every crack in the mask of Richard Hale. It wasn't just déjà vu. It was personal. The cabin felt cooler now, as if the oxygen had thinned. She could sense it in the way the flight attendants moved, and how the air stiffened around Richard. It was a storm building, one she had predicted years ago. Evelyn tapped her cane lightly on the floor, adjusting her gray shawl over her tailored navy pantsuit. She'd aged well, not from spa days or genetics, but from strategy and survival. At 72, Evelyn Moore carried more secrets in her silence than most men did in their memoirs. And now, she decided, silence had done enough. The male flight attendant passed by, checking on beverage service. "Excuse me?" Evelyn said, her voice smooth but steady. He turned, politely. "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to request a word with your lead attendant," she said, eyes never leaving the front of the cabin. The man blinked, surprised by her formality, but nodded. "Of course." Moments later, the purser arrived, tall, composed, and clearly rattled from the morning's developments. "Yes, ma'am? How can I assist you?" Evelyn looked him square in the eye and spoke calmly. "My name is Evelyn Moore. I used to be the CEO of Ether Corp." He stared. I beg your pardon? I ran the company for 12 years, she continued, voice crisp, before Richard Hale and his cronies pushed me into early retirement. Now the purser really stared. "I know who that woman is. Danielle Coleman. I mentored her when she was a rising AI researcher at Stanford. If you think what's happening is coincidence, you're mistaken." The purser's mouth opened, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "Now, I'd like to make a formal cabin statement, not for drama, for record." The flight attendant hesitated, clearly unsure, but Evelyn leaned slightly forward, a glint of fire in her eyes. "I have nothing to lose, but I know how much the truth matters in moments like this. You have a woman, wronged and removed, who represents integrity, and a man, entitled and strategic, who represents rot." Finally, the attendant gave a quiet nod. "Very well. Please wait one moment." As the crew coordinated, Evelyn sat back, eyes closing briefly. The memories came in flashes. Boardroom whispers, the rewritten contracts, the hostile vote that made Richard her successor. Back then, she'd chosen dignity over vengeance. But watching Danielle stand tall on this plane while the same pattern repeated, that changed things. The cabin lights brightened subtly, another shift. The captain had returned. The aircraft was ready to taxi, and then a chime echoed again. The purser took the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice calm but firm, "we have a special acknowledgement to make before takeoff." Passengers exchanged puzzled looks. "In seat 3A, we are honored to carry Ms. Evelyn Moore, former CEO of Ether Corp and one of the pioneers in artificial intelligence leadership." A smattering of applause began, but Evelyn rose before it could swell. She stepped into the aisle, steady with her cane, her voice clear without microphone. "I didn't ask for this attention, but I believe moments like these demand clarity. You all saw a woman removed from her rightful seat earlier. That woman is Danielle Coleman, my former mentee and the current CEO of Nova Mind. Her presence on this flight is not just personal, it's symbolic." Passengers leaned forward, wide-eyed. "She represents what this industry should be: ethical, brilliant, disruptive for the right reasons." The man who sat in her place? Richard Hale, the very executive who replaced me at Ether Corp years ago. Not by merit, but by manipulation. Murmurs erupted. I left quietly then, but I won't be silent now. What happened this morning was not a misunderstanding. It was a symptom of how power tries to humiliate purpose. A beat passed. Ms. Coleman deserves more than her seat. She deserves your respect." She gave a nod to the cabin, then returned to her seat, dignity undisturbed. Imani, several rows back, whispered into her phone mic, still live streaming, "History is being written in aisle 3. Richard sat frozen in 4C. No smirk now, no confidence, just a growing dread, because he knew exactly who Evelyn was. And if she had decided to step back into the arena, it meant the gloves were officially off. He reached for his phone, another error message. "Outbound communications blocked." He glanced at the window. The plane had begun taxiing. Too late. Across the aisle, a man in a dark suit leaned slightly and whispered just loud enough for Richard to hear. "She taught Danielle everything you never could." Richard looked forward again, jaw tight, but his palms were damp now. The flight was officially airborne, but his control plummeting. At 35,000 feet, surrounded by clouds and quiet murmurs, the world outside the aircraft seemed irrelevant. But Danielle Coleman knew better than most. Altitude never meant distance from danger. She had just returned to her seat in 1A, poised and unreadable, when her phone vibrated once under the tray table. A silent ping from the Cobalt channel, one of her most secure lines. She tapped the screen. A message popped up. "Sender, Marcia, encrypted channel subject, urgent, code red message. Julian's device flagged, forwarding metadata to you. Prepare for breach report." Danielle didn't move. She didn't even blink. Julian Quinn, her longest-serving advisor, trusted since NovaMind's second funding round. The one who introduced her to half the current board. The man who toasted with her the night the Senate confirmed her to the National AI Council, now flagged as a data leak. She opened the forwarded file. The first detail chilled her. Outgoing traffic from Julian's device had pinged off a foreign satellite within the last 90 minutes. The payload? A compressed folder labeled NVM Coleman Strategy Q2. NovaMind. Danielle Coleman. Strategy. Second quarter. Every internal memo she had prepared for her Washington meetings, her outlines for government contracts, her private AI ethics recommendations for Senate review, all of it, sent. She tapped deeper. The recipient domain was cloaked, but the routing trail, however obfuscated, ended at a known server cluster in Zurich, owned and operated by a shell firm that, 3 years ago, had merged silently into EtherCorp's European intelligence wing. Danielle exhaled once, long and slow. Then she closed her eyes. "I expected this," she whispered. The words weren't for drama. They were armor. Confirmation that she had not let her guard down, only her heart. Julian. She thought back to the first time they met. Stanford conference, rainy night. He stayed behind to help her fix a corrupted presentation file. Back then, he seemed harmless, curious, too eager, but smart. Over the years, he earned her trust, defended her ideas in hostile boardrooms, stood between her and 2 attempted buyouts. But he also always asked just a bit too much, had access just a bit too fast. And now, he had taken everything she built and handed it to the enemy. Danielle tapped a command into her phone's Cobalt app. "Revoke access. Quinn, Julian, Global." The system purged his credentials in less than 30 seconds. Board access, email history, calendar sync, zeroed. Across the country, in a glass-walled office in Manhattan, Julian Quinn's laptop screen flickered, logged him out of 6 portals, and froze permanently. He didn't even have time to say a word before NovaMind's entire internal cloud kicked him out like an immune system rejecting a virus. Back on the plane, Danielle reached for the call button. A flight attendant appeared quickly. "Yes, Ms. Coleman? Please let the captain know I'll require secure line communication upon landing. Priority override. Cobalt certified. Also," she paused, calculating, "ensure no passenger attempts mid-flight messaging on VPN channels. I suspect an attempt may still be made." The attendant gave a nod, eyes betraying more than just confusion. Fear, respect, Perhaps both. Danielle sat back, head tilting slightly against the leather headrest. Her mind raced. If Julian had handed EtherCorp their internal data, it wasn't just about corporate sabotage. It meant the enemy knew her legal framework for the Ethics Act, knew the exact language she planned to present to the Senate, knew her weak spots too, her concerns about AI bias and predictive grading, her doubts about international expansion timelines. She had laid out her soul in those memos, and now they weren't just exposed, they were weaponized. Across the aisle, Evelyn Moore glanced sideways, reading Danielle's expression without asking. "They breached you," she said softly. Danielle didn't respond. "You're still ahead," Evelyn continued. "You caught it in the air. They were banking on you finding out too late." Danielle finally turned to her, voice low and even. "They've had years to prepare. They've used my trust as a slow poison. This isn't just about control, Evelyn. It's about erasure." Evelyn nodded grimly. "Then make sure your response isn't just survival. Make it unforgettable." A chime echoed overhead. The captain spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Washington, D.C. shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten seatbelts." Danielle's fingers moved again, this time composing a message in her personal encrypted vault. 2. Senate Subcommittee Security Lead. Subject: emergency briefing required. Nova Mind breach message. Asset compromise confirmed. Urgent need for secure discussion prior to ethics hearing. Meeting must happen off record. Immediate. D. Coleman. She hit send. Then, almost as an afterthought, opened her camera roll. There was an old photo of her and Julian, laughing at a rooftop mixer, wine glasses midair, city lights behind them. She stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. No emotion, no nostalgia, just clean erasure. As the plane banked left toward the glittering skyline of D.C., Danielle Coleman's reflection in the window was sharp, unyielding. This wasn't betrayal. This was the beginning of war. The plane touched down at Dulles International with a smooth, effortless grace that belied the turbulence still vibrating beneath the surface. Passengers exhaled, phones lit up, and the tension that had simmered since LAX finally broke into subtle sighs and small talk. But for Richard Hale, Seat 4C had become a prison, and now the walls were closing in. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, a discreet message buzzed onto the lead flight attendant's handheld device. No chime, no vibration, just a green square with bold black text. "Passenger 4C, hold for federal escort." She swallowed hard, then calmly walked up the aisle and leaned in beside Richard. "Mr. Hale," she said smoothly, "we ask that you remain seated until all other passengers have deplaned. Airport security will assist you shortly." Richard froze. "Excuse me?" "It's a routine clearance matter," she replied, voice pleasant but professional. "Please wait in your seat." A few rows back, Imani's phone was still live streaming. Her lens caught the exchange and the change in Richard's expression, cocky replaced by cautious, then edging toward panic. Danielle, now standing near the cabin door with her leather tote slung over one shoulder, turned slightly and glanced over her shoulder. Their eyes met. She didn't blink. He looked away. As the last passengers exited, 2 uniformed agents stepped onto the aircraft, flanking Richard silently. They didn't cuff him. They didn't speak. But their presence alone shattered any illusion he had left. He rose slowly, every movement calculated now. Public humiliation wasn't foreign to him, but he wasn't used to being on the receiving end. When he stepped into the jet bridge, flashbulbs were already popping. Somehow, the press had arrived. Danielle walked past the reporters calmly, ignoring the shouted question, "Coleman, what happened on the flight? Was this retaliation? Did EtherCorp target you?" She gave no comment. Not here, not yet. Instead, she entered a black government SUV waiting just beyond the terminal gate. Inside, Marcia was already seated, laptop open, secure hotspot live. Danielle slid into the back seat and immediately took out her tablet. "Upload the Cobalt package," she said. Marcia nodded and tapped a sequence. A series of files uploaded instantly. Charts, recording, leaked documents. All of them tied to EtherCorp's ongoing efforts to manipulate AI education contracts across federal and state levels. But the crown jewel was a file labeled Project Silo, Internal Asset Fund, EtherCorp. It was their secret. A slush fund used to bribe lower-level politicians, derail public grant processes, and quietly buy out watchdog agencies before they could cry foul. Danielle looked at Marcia. "Send it to DOJ. Flag for Deputy AG Lusk. Encrypt level 6. On it." Within 60 seconds, the U.S. Department of Justice had everything. But the war was no longer just in government halls. In Midtown Manhattan, EtherCorp's HQ buzzed with increasing unrest. Inside a sleek 50th floor conference room, a group of shareholders stared at the Bloomberg ticker flashing across their wall screen. Rumor: DOJ to investigate EtherCorp. Potential market manipulation. The whispers turned to argument. In the corner, a man named Trevor Langley, one of EtherCorp's largest private shareholders, watched the screen with growing rage. He had invested $47 million into the company, trusted Richard, defended every questionable acquisition. But this was different. Trevor stood up, yanked out his phone, and hit record on his social media live stream. "This is Trevor Langley, and I'm here at EtherCorp HQ. I've been a shareholder since the beginning, but I'm done staying silent." The room fell silent behind him. "The rumors you're hearing, they're real. We've known about the secret fund for 2 years. We called it the Shadow Vault, and it was used to suppress innovation, especially companies founded by women and minorities." He turned the camera toward the room, revealing shocked faces and hushed gasps. "Let the world know. We knew, and now you do too." Within minutes, the stream had over 800,000 views. The term #Shadow Vault trended worldwide. Danielle's phone vibrated. She saw the headline and let out a slow, steady breath. "This changes everything," Marcia said. "No," Danielle replied. "This confirms everything." Back at the Department of Justice, Deputy Attorney General Elise Lusk read the initial files with hawk-like focus. The moment she opened Project Silo, she froze. "Get me Agent Ramirez, now," she ordered. 10 minutes later, a task force was mobilized. The silent war Danielle had prepared for was now public. Every senator, every agency, every tech partner knew Danielle Coleman wasn't just a CEO. She was the firewall, the whistle, the reckoning. And Richard Hale? He was no longer a strategist. He was a liability. By the time Danielle stepped into her secure DC hotel suite, the TV anchors were already dissecting the scandal. Breaking news as EtherCorp faces a federal investigation. Leaked documents suggest widespread suppression of minority-led startups. Danielle Coleman named as key whistleblower. She didn't smile. Not yet. There was still too much to do. But for the first time in days, she allowed herself one small moment of silence. Not peace, just the quiet hum that follows a storm's first strike. Danielle stood in front of the tall glass windows of the hotel's executive suite, gazing at the faint morning light rising over the Potomac River. Washington, D.C. was just waking up, but her war had been raging long before dawn. The knock on the door came exactly at 7 o'clock a.m., 3 precise taps. "No hesitation," Marcia answered, swinging the heavy oak door open to reveal 2 federal agents, one male, one female, dressed in dark suits with the calm intensity of those who lived on the edge of national crises. "Ms. Coleman," the woman said, flashing her badge. "I'm Special Agent Liana Brooks, FBI Counter-Corporate Crimes Division. This is Special Agent Thomas Vega." Danielle turned fully to face them, unreadable as ever. "We're not here to investigate you," Brooks said before Danielle could speak. "We're here to request your cooperation." Danielle gave a single nod. "Go on." We believe you've been targeted as part of a coordinated effort to suppress competitive startup ecosystems, specifically minority-led ventures, in the emerging AI education sector. Danielle's lips curled into something resembling amusement. You're late. Vega gave a tight smile. Possibly, but we have new intel, courtesy of your Cobalt upload and Trevor Langley's public statement. It was enough to unseal an internal case we've been building for months. Danielle gestured toward the table. Let's sit. The agent sat up quickly. A slim black folder was placed before her, sealed with the official FBI stamp. Brooks flipped it open to reveal a photo. Danielle's eyes narrowed. Richard Hale. But this wasn't just a portrait. It was a profile sheet, complete with an internal designation, Target Prime, Ops Code, Black Vault. We've been tracking Richard Hale's involvement in what we call the Operational Suppression Program, Brooks began. He wasn't just an executive. He was EtherCorp's designated fixer, sent to dismantle or derail any startup seen as a strategic threat. Vega continued. The program included surveillance, disinformation campaigns, strategic investments to implode from within, and in some cases, whistleblower entrapment. Danielle leaned back slowly. And you have proof? Brooks slid another document forward. Leaked memos, asset transfer logs, anonymized testimony from 2 former EtherCorp board assistants, and now your encrypted upload. Danielle studied the documents, page after page. She recognized some of the names, companies that had once seemed promising but disappeared suddenly from the radar. Founders discredited, IP absorbed, headlines twisted. They weren't just accidents. They were executions. And now they came for me, Danielle murmured. Brooks nodded. But you're the first who fought back and documented it properly. That's why we want you to testify, not just to the Senate committee, but to the federal grand jury we're assembling. Vega added, and possibly serve as a lead consultant in a counterintelligence task force focused on unethical corporate disruption. Danielle exhaled slowly. So I go from being targeted to being a weapon. No, Brooks said. You were always the weapon. They just underestimated how sharp. Danielle considered the implications. If she went public, if she testified, it would be war on a scale even EtherCorp hadn't prepared for. But the alternative? Silence. Letting Richard and his shadow network continue bearing futures for the sake of monopoly. I'll do it, she said finally. Vega passed her a secure tablet. You'll have to review and confirm each segment of your testimony. No leaks. You'll be under digital protection protocols starting now. Danielle nodded. And what about Richard? Brooks exchanged a look with Vega. Then she slid another folder forward. Danielle opened it. Inside was a report labeled Operation Cerulean Hand, Internal Communications Intercept, Subject, Richard Hale. She read the first few lines and froze. Target Hale instructed suppression of Novamind's funding pipeline via proxy firms in Dubai and Singapore. Initiated plan to embed internal mole. Asset confirmed. Julian Quinn. Ordered airline confrontation as Phase 1 disruption, monitored in real time via secure stream relay. Danielle blinked. They planned the plane? She whispered. Brooks nodded grimly. Every step, down to having a social media handler on standby to spin the narrative in EtherCorp's favor. But it went off script, Vega added. You didn't react as predicted. And Evelyn Moore's public statement? That detonated their fallback plan. Danielle felt the weight of it. This wasn't random. Richard Hale hadn't just taken her seat. He had engineered a trigger point, hoping to create just enough chaos to delay her testimony and discredit her in the court of public perception. He hadn't expected her to hold the line. He certainly hadn't expected Evelyn. I want full access to any files on Hale's digital handlers, Danielle said, her voice cold. And I want to see the budget trail on Julian's recruitment. You'll have it, Brooks promised. Danielle stood. I want to begin my statement now. Vega handed her a secure recorder. Room's yours. We'll monitor externally. As they left, Danielle turned toward the camera and began. My name is Danielle Coleman. I am the founder and CEO of Nova Mind. What you are about to hear will confirm how far powerful corporations will go to silence innovation they cannot control, and how far I'm willing to go to ensure they never succeed. Outside the secure room, Brooks turned to Vega. She's going to bury him. Vega nodded. He never stood a chance. The courtroom was sealed. No cameras, no press, no cell phones. Just four walls, guarded silence, and a storm no one could stop. Danielle sat at the end of the polished wood conference table, flanked by her legal counsel and a federal case agent. Her expression was calm, poised, unreadable. A woman prepared not just to defend her legacy, but to dismantle the machinery built to destroy it. Across the room, the heavy double doors opened. Two agents escorted Julian Quinn into the chamber. He wore a slate gray suit, hair slicked back with precision, and an expression teetering between smugness and caution. Danielle didn't flinch. Julian took his seat opposite her. He offered a shallow nod, part courtesy, part provocation. Special Agent Liana Brooks began the session, her tone professional and clipped. This is a closed session under the Department of Justice, preliminary evidence hearing on the Nova Mind breach. Mr. Julian Quinn has requested to deliver a voluntary statement regarding the allegations. Julian folded his hands. Thank you, Agent Brooks, he began. I want to be clear. My only interest here is in truth. I've worked beside Ms. Coleman for years. I've watched Nova Mind grow into a global force. But I've also seen decisions that worried me, risks that weren't disclosed, partnerships that raised flags. Danielle watched, still silent. Julian continued, his voice laced with manufactured concern. I have documents, copies of internal exchanges, suggesting Ms. Coleman bypassed board approvals on several federal lobbying efforts. If true, this raises questions about her compliance with funding regulations. The agents exchanged glances. Her counsel shifted slightly beside her. Julian went on. I didn't come here to accuse out of spite. I came because I believe transparency is necessary, even when it's uncomfortable. He paused, letting the air settle, like a showman basking in his own narrative. That's when Danielle leaned forward and spoke for the first time. Agent Brooks, she said, her voice cool. May I submit evidence? Brooks gestured. Go ahead. Danielle opened a slim black drive from her leather folder and passed it across the table. It contains a set of internal audio logs from Nova Mind's boardroom, recordings authorized and time-stamped under our compliance archive. This specific file is from 2 weeks ago, a private meeting Julian requested, which he believed was off-record. Julian's smile faltered. Brooks inserted the drive and tapped play. Julian's voice filled the room. If I can just slow her down, get her to delay that DC pitch by even a week, Richard says they can finalize the pressure campaign. She'll never know it was me. We'll blame a funding glitch. A second voice, unidentified, replied, You're sure you can access her email stack? Already cloned it, just waiting on Zurich to process the packet. After that, we're ghosting. Julian went pale. Brooks paused the audio. Zurich. That matches the satellite ping from the encrypted transmission. Vega, standing in the corner, added, cross-referencing the voice. It's confirmed. It's Quinn. Julian stood up, hands splayed. That recording is taken out of context. Brooks didn't let him finish. You are under investigation for corporate espionage, obstruction of federal inquiry, and collusion with a hostile economic entity. Please remain seated. Two agents moved behind him. Handcuffs clicked open. Julian looked around wildly, then at Danielle. You knew? All this time? She stared at him, voice quiet. I gave you every opportunity to prove your loyalty, but you chose legacy over conscience. As the cuffs closed around his wrists, he hissed, You can't win this. Danielle tilted her head. I already have. The agents escorted him out, the door slamming shut behind them. Silence hung thick. Then Agent Vega spoke. With that evidence, we can now expand the warrant scope to EtherCorp's entire financial architecture. Offshore accounts, proxy investors, even lobbying intermediaries. Brooks nodded. This opens the door to full-scale indictments. Danielle leaned back, exhausted but steady. Don't stop with Richard. Follow the paper trail to every corner they've bought. Vega looked at her with new respect. You just handed us a key to unlock a billion-dollar conspiracy. Danielle's counsel whispered, "This changes everything." But Danielle knew it wasn't over. It was only the beginning of the next battlefield, because she hadn't just exposed Julian. She had detonated the illusion of invincibility EtherCorp had wrapped around itself for over a decade. And now, the entire structure was cracking. The lights of the International AI Summit gleamed like constellations above the grand auditorium, bouncing off polished glass, brushed metal, and the calm, anxious faces of over 2,000 attendees. The air was crisp with anticipation. Reporters whispered from their booths, CEOs hunched together in reserved rows, and engineers adjusted lanyards nervously in the back rows. Danielle Coleman stood just behind the stage curtain, watching the countdown tick across the monitor. 0029, 0028. She didn't fidget, didn't check her notes, didn't rehearse her lines. She had lived this moment in her head for weeks, long before Richard Hale stole her seat, before Julian sold her trust, and even before the FBI handed her a stack of sealed indictments. This wasn't just a keynote. This was a reckoning. At 0, the auditorium dimmed. The MC stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage a pioneer in ethical artificial intelligence, CEO of NovaMind and recent recipient of the Global Tech Integrity Medal, Ms. Danielle Coleman." Applause swelled like a tidal wave. But as Danielle walked on stage in her dark fitted suit, the crowd didn't just clap. They rose, a standing ovation. Before she'd said a word, she took her place behind the podium, waited for silence, and then spoke. 10 days ago, I boarded a flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. I had a confirmed first-class ticket. My seat was taken, my presence was questioned, and I was removed for security verification. A hush rippled through the room. Cameras recorded, pens paused, eyes locked in. Many believed that moment was isolated. One woman wronged by one man. But I'm here to tell you, it wasn't a moment, it was a move. She tapped a remote. Behind her, the screen lit up with a chart, a web of connections, emails, satellite pings, funding timelines. EtherCorp at the center. It was part of a systematic effort to dismantle innovation led by voices like mine. Startups owned by women, by people of color, by leaders who refused to sell out. She clicked again. Images of companies that had disappeared, logos, press headlines, shuttered offices. They didn't just want to compete, they wanted to erase. Gasps echoed. Danielle continued, steady but fierce. I was targeted, followed, infiltrated. My team hacked. My seat stolen not just as a physical act, but as a metaphor. They hoped I'd react poorly, that I'd crack, that I'd quit. She paused. But I didn't. Applause burst from a few corners, swelling into a roar. I stood my ground, not out of ego, but because if I moved, they'd do it again. To someone younger, someone newer, someone less prepared. She tapped once more, a new graphic. Project Silo, Shadow Vault Activity. A single line appeared at the bottom. Confirmed, collusion across 5 continents. Danielle took a breath. This is bigger than NovaMind, bigger than me. This is about accountability in the age of autonomy. The room erupted again. Reporters tweeted in real time, hashtags forming instantly. Truth live, #Danielle speaks. AI justice. As the crowd settled, a second voice entered the stream, live via satellite. The screen behind Danielle split, revealing a broadcast studio in London. A middle-aged man appeared on screen, distinguished, well-known. It was Thomas E. Grant, CEO of Intermedia Group. one of the largest global media conglomerates. "Ms. Coleman," he said formally, "on behalf of Intermedia and its worldwide subsidiaries, we want to publicly express our support for you, Novamind, and the cause of ethical AI." A second feed lit up. Intermedia Europe, Intermedia Asia, Intermedia US. All the networks under Grant's empire followed with the same message. "We commit," Grant continued, "to ensuring that your story is told, without distortion, without delay. We also pledge resources toward independent investigative reporting into corporate manipulation of the AI space." Danielle blinked, stunned just long enough for emotion to threaten the edge of her composure. But she smiled, nodded once, and responded with calm grace. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. We need more than innovation. We need truth." The crowd stood again, this time in unison. It was no longer just a tech summit. It was a movement. Danielle concluded, "I leave you with this. In a world run by algorithms, integrity must be the source code. If we lose that, we lose the very humanity we claim to enhance." The final applause shook the room. Afterward, in the backstage corridor, Evelyn Moore met Danielle with a proud nod. "You didn't just hold the line," she said. "You rewrote the rules." Danielle smiled faintly. "We're not done yet." Evelyn leaned closer. "No, but the whole world is finally listening." It began not with sirens, but with silence. EtherCorp's glass tower in downtown Manhattan glinted beneath a cloudless sky, its mirror-like facade reflecting nothing but a calm city morning. Inside, suits moved efficiently between floors, quarterly reports stacked on screens. Interns ferried espresso shots to executives reviewing expansion deals. At precisely 9:01 a.m., that silence shattered. The building's internal security grid froze. Screens flickered, badge readers died, elevators halted. 31 floors of operational infrastructure locked down in unison. And then, like a quiet storm, they entered. Dozens of FBI agents in blue windbreakers swept through the lobby with precision. No yelling, no chaos, just clear commands and synchronized movement. Passcards overridden, network hardlines severed, cloud sync blocked at the root. By 9:06 a.m., the raid was live on 5 news networks. By 9:08, Hatch Either Collapse was trending globally. On the 32nd floor, Richard Hale stood at the head of a mahogany conference table, jaw locked, watching the footage of his own lobby fill with federal agents. "No one moves," he ordered, voice cold. A VP beside him whispered, "They have sealed warrants. It's real." "Of course it's real," Richard spat. "It's just wrong." But deep down, he knew this wasn't about Danielle Coleman anymore. This was about everything they'd done to stop people like her. The door burst open. Lead Agent Carmen Patel stepped in, flanked by 2 plainclothes agents. She moved like someone who had done this before. Clean, clinical, commanding. "Richard Hale," she said clearly, "you are under investigation for conspiracy to obstruct federal commerce, abuse of protected systems, and targeted corporate sabotage." Richard raised his chin, smugness barely holding. "Do you have any idea who I—" Agent Patel cut him off. "Save it for your lawyer. You'll need 3. As the agent stepped forward, the cameras, already tipped off by internal leaks, snapped into position outside the glass windows. Every media outlet had its lenses focused, and they got the shot. Richard Hale, CEO of EtherCorp, in handcuffs. By the time he was escorted into the elevator, stocks had dropped 12%. By the time he reached the FBI van, a journalist from Bloomberg was already calling it the most symbolic takedown. Takedown in tech since Enron. But the real twist came moments later. As Richard sat in the back of the SUV, wrists aching, suit wrinkled, he saw a familiar face enter the lobby. Marianne Bexley, Chief Legal Officer of EtherCorp. But instead of confronting the agents, she walked straight to the cameras. Unscripted, unprompted. She adjusted the mic, looked into the blinding lights, and said calmly, "For 10 years, I have remained silent inside this company. But this morning, I have submitted to the FBI over 4,000 internal documents, including emails, recordings, and strategic memos signed by Mr. Hale himself." Reporters leaned forward. Those documents reveal a decade-long covert operation to identify, target, and destroy startups led by women, minorities, and young innovators. Entire funding cycles were manipulated, patent approvals delayed, social smear campaigns coordinated. Gasps erupted. Marianne didn't stop. "I personally witnessed plans to discredit Danielle Coleman, dismantle Novamind's access to AI consortiums, and derail federal protections tied to Tier 1 innovators," a reporter shouted. "Why come forward now?" Marianne looked straight into the lens. "Because power means nothing when your silence protects injustice." The nation watched. The world watched. And for the first time, someone inside had said it aloud. Inside the FBI van, Richard's head slumped back against the window. Sweat beaded down his temple. For the first time, he looked old. Agent Patel slid into the front seat. "You had a good run, Hale," she said, turning back slightly. "But you made the mistake everyone like you makes." He didn't respond. "You thought no one would ever talk." Across the country, Danielle watched the press conference from her office in San Francisco, flanked by Evelyn and Claire. When Marianne dropped the final statement, Claire exhaled hard. "My God, she really said it." Evelyn smiled. "One of their own. That's what it took." Danielle didn't speak right away. She only watched as the chyron on the screen updated. Breaking. EtherCorp CEO arrested. Federal sabotage scheme exposed. Then came a second line, smaller, but far louder in implication. Whistleblower reveals targeted attacks on innovators of color, Danielle finally spoke. "They built the tower to reflect light," she said softly. "But it shattered when truth hit it." Claire nodded slowly. "People will remember this." Danielle turned away from the screen and toward her desk, where a single framed photo sat. Her father, in uniform. She whispered, "I kept my seat, Dad." Outside, in the street below, protesters were already gathering, not to march against her, but for her. It was the most crowded session in the U.S. Capitol in over a decade. Reporters were elbow to elbow in the press gallery. Cameras from every major network lined the upper walls. Staffers buzzed with barely concealed excitement, darting from senator to senator, from aide to analyst. The marble rotunda outside the chamber had turned into a museum of protest signs, now laminated and preserved. "Keep your seat. Code blue means truth. Innovation belongs to everyone." At the center of it all stood a woman in a tailored navy suit, Danielle Coleman. Her eyes scanned the chamber floor, calm but alight. Not with ego, but with history. Speaker Caldwell's voice echoed through the microphones. "Madam Clerk, please read the title of the bill before the House." The clerk stood, monotone steady. H.R. 7685, the Coleman Act, a bill to establish protections for underrepresented founders in the technology sector, ensure equal access to innovation funding, and regulate federal oversight of Tier 1 certified tech leaders. There it was, her name, etched into legislation. Danielle inhaled deeply. Across the aisle, lawmakers whispered among themselves. Some allies, others who had once tried to dismiss her testimony. But none could deny the shift she had sparked. Speaker Caldwell raised the gavel. "All those in favor?" A wave of eyes surged through the chamber. "All opposed?" Scattered silence. The gavel struck once, then again. "Motion carried. The Coleman Act is hereby passed." The chamber erupted. Applause thundered from both sides. Reporters shouted into phones. Analysts rushed to push breaking news alerts. Danielle didn't smile broadly. She only bowed her head slightly, exhaling the breath she had held for months. The impossible had passed. Later that afternoon, in the rose garden of the White House, President Malik stood behind a podium flanked by Danielle, Secretary of Education Angela Ruiz, and a sea of young innovators invited from across the country. The president adjusted the microphone. When we talk about progress, we often forget the human face behind it. Danielle Coleman's story reminded us all what it means to fight, not just for your seat, but for the seats of every kid who thinks they don't belong. Applause followed. He turned to Danielle. Ms. Coleman, it is my honor to officially appoint you Strategic Advisor for Artificial Intelligence Ethics and Innovation to the U.S. Department of Education. Danielle stepped forward, extending her hand to accept the certificate. She spoke, voice steady but heartfelt. I accept this responsibility not just as a leader in tech, but as someone who has been told no more times than I can count. Every no built the path to this yes. She turned to the young guests in the front row. Black girls in robotics club hoodies, Latino boys with startup pitch decks, and indigenous teens holding science fair medals. This is your country too, she said. And your code, your ideas, your dreams, they deserve a future without gatekeepers. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Federal guidelines were rewritten under the Coleman Act. Accelerator programs opened specifically for underfunded founders. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. And across America's campuses, AI and ethics were no longer taught as separate subjects, but as inseparable threads of the same future. Danielle's office in the Department of Education was modest. Glass walls, clean design. But on her desk sat one item that meant more than any title. Noah's bracelet. Now deactivated, its once blinking lights replaced with a still, silver gleam. It reminded her daily that even when power goes silent, memory speaks. One afternoon, a knock came at her door. It was Claire, holding a thick envelope. You should read this, she said, handing it over. Inside were letters, hundreds, from students, teachers, startups, and even anonymous tech employees. One caught Danielle's eye. Ms. Coleman, my name is Mia. I'm 12. After what happened on that plane, I told my school I want to be an AI scientist. They laughed, but I'm still doing it. Thank you. Tears pricked the corner of Danielle's eyes. She placed the letter beside the bracelet. That weekend, at a national education summit, Danielle took the stage one more time. I'm not here to talk about algorithms, she began. I'm here to talk about what happens when we stop asking who's writing them and why. She paused, scanning the crowd. They tried to steal a seat, but what they stole was much bigger, trust. And today, we're building that trust back, not with noise, but with action. A standing ovation followed. One delegate whispered to another, she's not just fixing the system, she's rewriting the code of culture. Backstage, Evelyn Moore waited with a proud smile. Told you, she said. Danielle smiled softly. We're just getting started. Exactly 1 year had passed, and everything had changed. The airport terminal hummed with quiet reverence as Flight C1 taxied toward the gate. Not just any plane. This one bore a new designation, gleaming under the morning sun. Coleman One, painted in elegant navy serif letters across the fuselage, just beneath the cockpit, beside a gold-trimmed emblem of a circuit winding into a tree. Inside the terminal, passengers gathered at Gate 12 watched in silent awe as ground crew unfurled a carpet, not red, but deep blue. And at the center of it all stood Danielle Coleman, her charcoal blazer crisp, her poise effortless. Her name wasn't just on the manifest today. It was on the aircraft. As she approached the jet bridge, a familiar face met her with a practiced, proud smile. Erica Wallace. But this time not in anger or judgment. Now wearing the golden stripes of a lead ambassador for the Coleman Fellowship, one of dozens of retrained airline professionals dedicated to safety, equity, and reform in tech-linked air travel. Ms. Coleman, Erica said, voice soft, respectful. Welcome back. Danielle returned the nod, warm but measured. I heard you volunteered for this route. Erica nodded. I wanted to see it through. The cabin doors opened with a hiss. Danielle stepped inside. The soft lighting had changed. No longer sterile white, but a soft, warm hue. Calming, respectful. She walked past row after row until she reached it. Seat 1A. Not just any seat now. The plaque above it read, "Reserved in perpetuity, D. Coleman, founder, Dream Space, architect of Code Blue Reform." As Danielle eased into the seat, the overhead lighting pulsed briefly, syncing with her bracelet, now ornamental but still functional. A soft chime echoed. Passengers entering behind her paused, some offering smiles, others silent nods of admiration. For once, no one questioned why she belonged there. She looked out the window, sunlight slicing across the tarmac. A memory flickered. Noah's silent face, Claire's trembling voice, Erica's outburst, and her own hand, clenching a torn boarding pass. A lifetime ago. Yet just last year. As the cabin settled, Evelyn Moore appeared beside her, carrying a sleek silver box, worn at the edges like it had passed through time. She held it delicately. "I've been meaning to give you this," Evelyn said, eyes misting slightly. "It's from my father. Found it in his safe 3 weeks ago. Labeled only with one word, Coleman." Danielle's breath caught. Evelyn opened the box slowly. Inside lay a small envelope, yellowing at the edges, sealed with red wax. A note attached read, "For the day she claims her seat, J.M." Danielle opened the letter. Her eyes scanned the neat, looping handwriting of James Moore, aviation regulator, ethics architect, Evelyn's late father, and silent supporter of her father's work. The letter read, "Danielle, if you're reading this, it means the system didn't crush you. You've done what many of us never could, turned the seat of a child into the helm of a movement. They will try to erase people like you, like your father, like Noah. But if you build well, if you build loudly, they won't be able to, so build the future they can't erase." James Moore. Danielle didn't cry. She just sat silently, the letter trembling in her hands. For a moment, the cabin around her faded. No chimes, no flight attendants, no passengers. Only her, the seat, the memory, and the mission. As the engines hummed to life, Erica reappeared. "We'll be taking off shortly. Ms. Coleman, on behalf of this entire flight and what you've done for aviation ethics, we'd like to thank you." Danielle offered a nod. "Then let's make it a smooth one." Laughter rippled gently, but beneath it lay truth. Flight C1 lifted into the sky with a grace uncommon for metal. Passengers applauded softly as the wheels retracted. At 30,000 feet, the onboard screen didn't play movies. Instead, it shared a short documentary about Code Blue Reform, the creation of the Coleman Fellowship, and the new global initiative connecting young innovators from over 90 countries. The final frame showed Danielle, standing in front of a classroom of children in South Africa, smiling beneath a chalkboard filled with scribbled AI models and phrases like, "Code is power, so write justice." Hours later, as the plane began its descent into San Francisco, a girl in row 4B tapped her mother. "Mom," she whispered, "is that the lady who changed the rules?" Her mother nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, that's her." The girl stared forward at seat 1A and smiled. Danielle stepped off the plane into the crisp California breeze, welcomed by a small crowd of educators, tech leaders, and DreamSpace students holding signs. "Thank you for keeping our seats safe. Justice codes forever." Evelyn leaned in quietly. "So, what now?" Danielle looked ahead at the horizon. "Now we build," she said, "and we keep building, until no seat is stolen, until no voice is silenced, until no child wonders if they belong." She turned to the media with a calm, commanding presence. The wind caught her blazer just as the cameras clicked. The woman who once fought for seat 1A now owned the sky.